This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Biden today has secured his 200th judicial confirmation. Biden and his allies are calling this a milestone. The Senate today voted to confirm Biden's nominee, U.S. Magistrate Judge Angela Martinez, as a federal district court judge in Arizona. In a statement, Biden said, quote, "Today we reached another milestone in the effort to protect the freedoms and liberties of all Americans." He highlighted that over 60% of his appointees are women and members of racial minorities. Former President Trump appointed 234 judges to life-tenured positions on the federal bench. That was the second highest during a single term, behind only President Jimmy Carter. Biden's allies say that at the current pace, Biden could surpass Trump's record. Biden currently has 23 pending nominees, but his nominees could still face challenges in the Senate, where Democrats hold a slim majority of 51 to 49. The Biden administration pushing forward with billions more in student debt cancellation, sparking Republican backlash, and the White House voicing concerns over Israel's security as several European countries now moving to recognize a Palestinian state. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the updates.
The White House on Wednesday announced an additional $7.7 billion in student debt cancellation for more than 160,000 Americans. The White House says Wednesday's announcement will bring the total amount of student debt cancellation by the Biden administration to over $160 billion. It comes as the election in November is looming, and President Biden has been eager to tout his work in canceling student debt, as administration now makes such announcements almost once every month. Here's Biden touting its work to cancel student debt last weekend, and the White House on Wednesday defending that move.
I'm relieving the burden of student debt. The Supreme Court told me I couldn't. I found two other ways to do it.
We're talking about folks who are in debt who are literally being crushed. We want to give them that breathing room.
But Republicans are strongly criticizing such actions.
We estimate all recent student debt cancellation policies will cost a combined $870 billion to $1.4 trillion that they think could win them a few votes in November.
The White House, meanwhile, accuses Republicans of getting in the way of helping the administration bring relief to Americans. And on Israel, the White House on Wednesday said it supports a two-state solution through negotiations with the parties, but not a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state like the one now being planned by Spain, Ireland, and Norway. The White House also expressed concerns over Israel's long-term security, as it's now facing pressure from more countries.
We certainly have seen a growing chorus of voices, including voices that had previously been in support of Israel, drift in another direction. That is of concern to us because we do not believe that that contributes to Israel's long-term security or vitality.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Wednesday said the recognition of a Palestinian state will be a reward for terror, adding that this will be a terror state. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Attorneys in the Trump classified documents case get into a shouting match today as defendant Walt Nauta attempts to get the charges against him dismissed. Meanwhile, new information from court filings has been made public. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has the details.
Sparks fly at a Florida hearing in the Trump classified documents case. The proceeding on Wednesday was intended for oral arguments on defendant Walt Nauta's motion to dismiss the case. Nauta accuses the prosecution of selectively and vindictively bringing charges against him. During arguments, the hearing turned to a disagreement between prosecutor David Harbach and Nauta's defense attorney Stanley Woodward. Woodward claimed that in 2022, Special Prosecutor Jay Bratt threatened to damage a judicial nomination if the defense attorney didn't convince Nauta to cooperate. Harbach ultimately denied Woodward's claim in a heated response. Nauta is seeking dismissal of the case against him based on a claim that he was charged after he refused to cooperate with the Justice Department's investigation. Judge Eileen Cannon did not issue a ruling from the bench. Meanwhile, hundreds of pages of previously sealed court filings were posted publicly. In a Sunday order, Cannon allowed the documents to be made public. She expressed disappointment the special counsel's office had requested redactions of information in the newly unsealed filings, when previously they had agreed to allow all of the information to be published. Some of the new information relates to the search warrant the FBI obtained to search former President Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. In a motion filed on Tuesday, Trump claims that the warrant was unconstitutional because it authorized agents to seize virtually any document from Mar-a-Lago. Government officials have acknowledged they improperly seized passports and some other materials, but the prosecution argues that the search was legal and that Trump lacked authority to possess classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Speaking of Trump, he's now won the vote of Nikki Haley, his former competitor for the 2024 presidential election. She said while he hasn't been perfect on key issues in her view, he's a better option than Biden, especially with regards to supporting allies and securing the border. Hunter Biden's trial for tax violations is now set for September. The judge agreed to the delay, with the gun trial still scheduled for June. Meanwhile, the House committee investigating him says it'll release evidence showing the president's son lied under oath to Congress. The committee voted in a closed-door session today to release 100 pages of new evidence in the case. They say it reveals the president's son indisputably lied at least 3 times during his sworn testimony in February. Some of the documents from an IRS agent show Hunter was directly connected to a corporate bank account he had access to. Committee members also say he lied about helping business associates obtain visas. The committee has emails between Hunter and his associates showing he tried to assist in getting a visa for the founder of a Ukrainian gas company. Committee Chairman Republican Jason Smith stated, quote, "Not only did Hunter Biden refuse to comply with his initial subpoena until threatened with criminal contempt, but he then came before Congress and lied." A city struggling with crime, homelessness, and drug abuse is looking for change. Voters in Portland, Oregon are on track to boot their prosecutor, who's accused of being soft on crime, and House Republicans have regained a seat in Congress. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more on the latest primaries.
The latest primary results show a shift in the diagram on both the local and federal levels. Portland, Oregon is on track to replacing their district attorney, Mike Schmidt, with Nathan Vasquez, who campaigned on bringing accountability back to the crime-ridden city. Now, the fact that this liberal city is willing to replace their progressive district attorney with a previously registered Republican shows that they're over the soft on crime tactics after getting a taste of it and now want to return to some law and order. Also in Oregon, Maxine Dexter is chosen as the Democrat pick for Congress. Her win against Sushila Jayapal is one example of the Democrat base rejecting anti-Israel candidates. Dexter set herself apart by campaigning on her support for the Jewish state and won substantial campaign dollars from pro-Israel groups. Now over in Georgia, 2 key figures in former President Trump's election interference case prevail. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis won the Democratic primary, and Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee also defeated his challenger. As for the federal level, House Speaker Mike Johnson will have some cushion now when bringing tough votes to the floor. That's because a special election in California was won by a Trump-backed candidate, Vince Fong. He'll finish out the remainder of former Speaker Kevin McCarthy's term. That brings the House breakdown now to 218 Republicans versus 213 Democrats. But with 1 vote gained, another is now lost. Congressman Greg Murphy is on leave having a brain tumor removed, and every single vote counts for Johnson now. That's especially so as leadership may soon push a vote to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. That's for failing to turn over audio recordings of an interview with President Biden regarding his withholding of classified documents. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The families of victims of the Uvalde school shooting announced today a $2 million settlement with the Texas city. This comes almost 2 years after a teenage gunman killed 19 students and 2 teachers at Robb Elementary School. The city of Uvalde will pay $2 million to the families of 17 children killed in the school shooting and 2 who survived. Further legal action could have plunged the city into bankruptcy, which the family said they do not want. The settlement also includes enhanced training for Uvalde police officers. Law enforcement was heavily criticized following the shooting for not reacting with the urgency the situation demanded, waiting outside the school for over an hour. The families are now taking new legal action against 92 state officers of the Department of Public Safety. Senators are divided over a border security bill. Democrats urge Republicans to vote for it, but the GOP says the vote should not even happen in the first place, accusing Democrats of playing political games.
Will both sides come together to advance a bipartisan border security bill, or will partisanship get in the way once again?
Thursday will be the second time Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer brings the bill for a vote. That's after it failed in February, although it had the support from Republican Senators Mitch McConnell, James Lankford, and others. Senate Democrats on Wednesday called on Republicans to pass it this time.
It's time for our Republican colleagues who keep going to the floor and saying somebody should do something about the border. Somebody should do something about the border. Well, 105 days ago, they had a chance to do something. Tomorrow, they're going to have another chance, and we hope that they will join us in voting yes.
The White House on Wednesday also voiced support for the bill.
The toughest, fairest border security agreement in decades.
But the bill contains certain provisions that Republicans strongly oppose, especially one that says if daily encounters go up to 5,000, then Homeland Security is required to shut down the border. Republicans say 5,000 people a day is too many.
Chuck Schumer's bill has some supposed limits on how many illegal immigrants can break the law and illegally enter this country every day. But even those limits aren't clear.
Republicans also criticized Democrats for not picking up H.R. 2, a border bill which passed the House a few months ago. Schumer on Wednesday said H.R. 2 is only a gimmick because it passed the House without a single vote from a Democrat. But the Senate's border security bill now also seems to have no more Republican support. News outlet The Hill reports that no Republican senator has yet said they will vote for it. Even Senator Lankford, who helped negotiate the bill earlier this year, is against the second vote.
Now that same option that everyone in this whole body knows won't pass is now coming back to this body again. This is not about trying to pass something. This is about a show vote in this body to show, look, we tried to vote on something and those mean Republicans blocked it.
Senator Schumer on Wednesday acknowledged that not all Democrats will vote for the bill, meaning there's little chance it will actually pass. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Late Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi's funeral was held today. Foreign dignitaries, including the leader of Hamas, gathered in Tehran for the funeral. NTD's Fiona G has more.
Among the attendants were officials from Iraq, Turkey, Egypt, and dozens of other countries. Leaders of terrorist groups supported by Iran also attended, including Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Before the funeral began, Haniyeh spoke, and the crowd chanted, "Death to Israel." The Iranian regime's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, also attended the funeral. As Raisi's coffin was carried out, the crowd began chanting, "Death to America." Raisi's body will be transferred to his hometown in eastern Iran for burial tomorrow. Prosecutors have warned the public against celebrating Raisi's death. A heavy security presence has also been reported in Tehran since Raisi's helicopter crash. Meanwhile, the war in Gaza rages on. According to the Pentagon, humanitarian aid delivery trucks are being hijacked before they can reach their destination. An initial 569 metric tons of aid has been shipped from a temporary causeway built by the Pentagon. Parts of those shipments were also hijacked and seized. Air Force Major General Pat Ryder acknowledged the need for more transport routes and the desperation in Gaza, but also emphasized that the safety of aid workers is a key consideration. Fiona G., NTD News.
Earlier, we spoke with Rabbi Abraham Cooper, former chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. We got his perspective on the latest developments in the Middle East. Rabbi Abraham Cooper, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
To begin, the families of the 7 female Israeli soldiers who were captured by Hamas on October 7th have released a graphic video of what happened to them during that time. Now, this comes as pressure is rising against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a hostage deal. Now, this video came out one day after the latest round of hostage and ceasefire talks died down in Cairo without a deal. What do you see next in terms of getting that hostage deal?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. When we look at those images, it brings back October 7th. You can't look away from those terrible images and to understand what these girls have been going through. And I think the release of the images is to try to awaken the world's consciousness about what actually has transpired here. A sovereign part of the state of Israel, no settlements, was invaded on October 7th. Over 1,200 innocent civilians were murdered, mass rapes, kidnappings, etc. And of course, a whole movement in Israel to sort of get to any deal in order to get back the remaining hostages, and that's totally understandable. Unfortunately, Qatar turned out not to be the right address. They weren't ready to do the things to lean on Hamas to make the stuff, the exchange of mass murderers for the innocent hostages. And I think at this point, in terms of the Israeli community, I think you have to come to an objective conclusion that the only way Israel's going to get those hostages, hopefully some still alive and those who are already dead, is through military means. And the delaying tactics, the pressure from the outside about Rafah and other issues, every day that Israel's delayed in finally surrounding these monsters is probably another death of another hostage. It's difficult to put it in any other way, but objectively, it's a disastrous situation. It's been 7 months. So Israel as a nation, I think, is still reeling from it. And then to see, I think, a unified stand on the part of Israelis who can't agree about anything politically. But in light of the ICC indictment and how it was twinned with Hamas, I think that has pushed Israel to basically draw the line. And I think we can expect to see a lot more activity in Gaza while still being concerned for the innocent Gazans who are caught up in this. And on the other hand, Israel also is now confronted by the latest news that Germany announced that they would actually arrest Bibi Netanyahu if he flew into Berlin, if there was an ICC arrest warrant. That announcement itself, as far as I'm concerned, is beyond the pale. The U.S. is holding firm, and I think also Congress, many years and many presidents basically say, the only thing you can say, if you want to make peace between two parties, they have to sit down and iron it out. It can't be done through fiat, through announcements, as we have Norway, Spain, and Ireland announcing they're recognizing the state of Palestine. And by the way, if there really is a state of Palestine, I guess UNRWA, that deals with Palestinian refugees, can close down on the West Bank and in Gaza because there's now a state of Palestine. So it is a very difficult time emotionally, and I think also physically for the people in Israel. The army's been fighting. It's a people's army. They've been fighting now for 7 months without rest. They're threatened by Hezbollah in the north. But there is a deep resolve on the part of the people that they're never going to allow October 7th to happen again.
Rabbi, you mentioned the ICC arrest, or the International Criminal Court's arrest warrants for both Israeli and Hamas leaders. Now, President Biden has shot back at that, saying there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. But how do you see these arrest warrants impacting a potential hostage release?
I think they don't impact whatsoever. Israel is not subject to ICC diktats. Neither, by the way, is the United States. Although, if this arrest warrant actually goes through, every American president, present and past, every military leader of the U.S. military, present and past, activities in Afghanistan and elsewhere around the world, you can see the same thing. So from a practical point of view, what it means is that for an Israeli prime minister or a defense minister to get from point A to point B, they may not be able to even fly over the airspace of certain countries. But on a deeper level, you know, the Jewish communities here in the United States, in Canada, Australia, across Europe, we're suffering a very powerful surge of anti-Semitism. If the International Criminal Court identifies a democratically elected leader essentially as a criminal, you're basically accusing that country of being a criminal enterprise. And what that will happen, especially through social media, but also in the halls of power and in the media, is the demonization of the Jewish state and the further demonization of people like myself, who call ourselves Zionists, lovers of Zion. That's where we'll have the greatest impact. Why, at this point, why would Hamas negotiate anything? So they're losing their people in the field, and innocent civilians are being killed. They stole and resold $500 million of aid that came into the Gaza Strip. Essentially, the American taxpayers and others been paying, for them to be able to continue the war. So the ICC announcement emboldens Hamas to hold out, leaving Israel with really just one option. They have to go in and they have to get them directly. And we pray for the innocents.
Rabbi Abraham Cooper, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
In Britain today, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is calling for a general election on the 4th of July. Some had anticipated it to be in the fall.
This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders.
Sunak listed what he said were his achievements in government, not only as prime minister, but also as a former finance minister. He said he will fight for every vote in the coming weeks and that only a conservative government under his lead, quote, will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk. Analysts say the timing of the election by the prime minister is calculated to the advantage of his party, as polls show that the Labour Party has a chance to win. President Biden is welcoming Kenyan President William Ruto for a 3-day state visit. One of Washington's goals, countering the Chinese regime's influence in Africa. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley joins us from Capitol Hill.
During his visit to Washington, Kenyan President William Ruto is seeking the U.S.'s support with investments, infrastructure projects, as well as paying off its foreign debt. Most of Kenya's debts are owed to China. It's part of the Chinese regime's Belt and Road Initiative, a series of infrastructure projects across over 100 countries. It's being used to gain political influence and start military installations. Some of these projects have structural flaws and end up with irreparable damage, wasting billions of dollars. China's loans with high interest payments have left countries with billions in debt. Kenya raised taxes to pay back its debt to the Chinese regime, but such a policy led to violent protests in which 6 people were shot and killed in July 2023. The House Select Committee on the CCP discussed the impacts of this during a recent hearing. Watch.
Take Kenya, for example. The PRC accounts for almost 3/4 of its bilateral debt, and this debt has even led to deadly unrest.
It is true that the Ruto administration in Kenya has increased taxes. It's also cut food and fuel subsidies to avoid defaulting on its repayment obligations to the Chinese and non-Chinese creditors.
The Biden administration says it may invest up to $55 billion in Kenya. This is the first time an African leader has had a state visit to the U.S. since 2008. It's also the 60th anniversary of U.S.-Kenya relations. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Joining me now to discuss that hearing and the newly unsealed filings in Trump's Florida case is Andrew Cherkasky, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you. Now, to begin, the judge in Trump's classified documents case today said the language in the indictment could be confusing to jurors. She noted the stacking of the words knowingly and corruptly used to refer to 2 states of mind. Break this down for us. Could it potentially confuse a jury?
Well, it certainly could potentially confuse a jury. The issue being that there are multiple layers of specific intent, also kind of known as the mental intent of the defendant in engaging in the alleged misconduct. The charges, as multiple as they are all a bit different one to the next. And the defense was very critical of the ways in which the prosecution alleged those crimes to have taken place in the initial indictment. And so it creates a kind of a potpourri, the judge said, of issues with the various wording choices, getting really deep into the semantics of how those charges are alleged during that hearing today.
And Andrew, the hearing today was not without drama, at one point devolving into a shouting match, with the prosecution pushing back on allegations of a vindictive prosecution as a, quote, garbage argument. Looking beyond the noise, though, what is your read on today's developments?
Well, the majority of the anger, the kind of outbursts in court, deal with this meeting that prosecutors had with an attorney for Walt, the personal assistant to Neda. Excuse me, I couldn't remember the last name for a moment there. The personal assistant to the former president, where he says the prosecutors pressured him, essentially holding over his head a nomination to be a federal judge if he didn't get Neda to plead guilty and flip on the former president. That's something that does sit poorly with me as a criminal defense attorney, essentially saying you need to convince your client to do something, otherwise you're going to, as an attorney, face consequences in the potential promotion that you're looking at. The prosecutors deny that, saying that they were using lawful and normal techniques in how they were engaging in their negotiations. But I don't know that that is very normal in the course of conduct, to essentially threaten an attorney to get him to turn or make his client turn or otherwise lose that future job. So you can understand why those passions got raised, the judge trying to calm all the attorneys down, but they went back and forth in quite a heated way throughout their arguments today.
And now Trump and his defense are alleging prosecutorial misconduct, pushing for the case to be dismissed. In your view, how much merit does the defense's argument have? How likely is dismissal?
Well, there's certainly issues that raise quite a bit of concerns in many different aspects of the prosecution, from the reason that they brought it in the first place, this, of course, being a dispute over the return of classified documents that the National Archives said that they were entitled to. President Trump has denied wrongdoing in this, saying that he had a right to declassify these documents and hold them under the Presidential Record Act. We have other issues that have arisen as well in terms of how the prosecutors have disclosed certain documents, or whether they've moved classified documents, the covers that they put on it. A lot of issues have kind of come up through the discovery process. The judge has been sensitive to that, and that's one of the reasons why the trial currently is on hold. And so I think that the defense attorneys in this case have very legitimate arguments. I don't know if they're necessarily winning arguments. I think that you could kind of boil it down to how you see this case at a very fundamental level, whether you see this as a justified prosecution in the first place, or whether whether this should have all along been an administrative dispute between a former president and executive agencies and should have been handled in perhaps a civil forum, a civil court, as opposed to being a criminal court. And so that very different idea, kind of that fundamental idea, I think is the answer as to whether the prosecutors perhaps stepped over the line. But sometimes when it's a close call or when it's something that's unique as it is here, criminal judges will allow these things to move forward and ultimately allow the appellate courts to sort through it, as opposed to taking the dramatic step of dismissing the case.
And Andrew, switching gears now to Trump's criminal trial in New York, prosecution and defense are hashing out jury instructions as the judge has signaled he would finalize them this week. What is the significance of the jury instructions? How could it impact the jury's decision?
Well, pulling back the curtain a little bit on how criminal trials proceed, you have your indictments that state the offenses that the prosecutors are alleging. And then you go through the trial itself, both sides essentially the prosecutors trying to prove it up and the defense essentially poking holes in that proof. Obviously, it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. But after the facts are introduced, but before the closing arguments and before the jury deliberates, the judge instructs the jury on how to apply the facts and the events that happened during the trial to the law itself. And so it talks really about how the law is supposed to be interpreted by the jury and what the prosecutors must prove along the way. They, at a very basic level, the judge slices it up into elements that must be proved. And those elements have very specific legal definitions that go along with it. In a case as nuanced and as unheard as this case before, it gets into some really technical issues because, as we know, there's the misdemeanor crime, and then that misdemeanor crime, in order to avoid statute of limitations issue, has to be accompanied by a second misdemeanor or an additional crime on top of that. And those all have multiple levels of specific intent, the criminal mind of the defendant himself, and how the judge puts that all together, very complicated, very kind of unprecedented as we have in this case. And then finally, the judge still has in front of him this motion to dismiss, alleging that the prosecutors never proved that the entry of legal expenses into the business records was technically improper or unlawful, as it were. And so the prosecutors still have to deal with that. The judge not likely to grant that, but I think that the judge would be making a terrible mistake by not granting that motion, because those entries as legal expenses appears to me to be a perfectly legal way to book the expenditure of money on a non-disclosure agreement.
Andrew Cherkasky, former federal prosecutor and defense attorney, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken testified today before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on State Foreign Operations and related programs to justify the administration's 2025 fiscal year budget request. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
The Biden administration has requested Congress $58 billion for State Department operations for fiscal year 2025. House Appropriation Committee Chairman Congressman Tom Cole has allocated a little over $51 billion for State Department operations for next year, leaving a $7 billion gap in between what the White House wants and what House Republicans are willing to offer. Subcommittee Democratic Ranking Member Congresswoman Barbara Lee defended the administration's budget request and highlighted the importance of DEI policies.
Diversity is the American and our country's superpower. However, far too often, the representation of the United States is not reflective of the full spectrum of backgrounds and experiences that America has to offer.
Subcommittee Chairman Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart, the Republican from Florida, used his opening remarks to criticize the White House for their policy towards Israel and also for removing Cuba from the list of states who sponsor terrorism. Chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Congressman Tom Cole, questioned Secretary Blinken for his budget request.
I am, however, concerned that the budget proposes billions in additional mandatory funding and other budgetary gimmicks. When your department or any executive branch agency resorts to budgetary gamesmanship rather than making the hard strategic choices necessitated by limited resources, it does a disservice to your cause.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken argued that internships and educational programs are one of the most cost-efficient measures applied by the State Department in recent years to promote their missions worldwide.
We're also asking Congress to fully fund the State Department's educational and cultural exchange programs. They're one of the best, most cost-effective tools that I've seen for advancing our values and interests around the world. They support the students, the researchers, the young professionals from our communities who study and work abroad. They connect us in the world with the world in powerful human ways.
At least one person was arrested during the hearing for interrupting proceedings in protest of U.S. support towards Israel. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Elsewhere on Capitol Hill today, lawmakers grilled Dr. Anthony Fauci's top advisor, David Morens. He allegedly destroyed information related to the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic. The physician came into the spotlight after reports showed his agency funded EcoHealth Alliance to conduct gain-of-function research.
August 27, 2020, after NIH was awarded a $7.5 million grant to EcoHealth Alliance, you wrote to him and you asked, do I get a kickback? And he responded saying, thanks for the kind words, and of course there's a kickback, period.
You're blurring the lines between whether you are taking actions in your official capacity with the federal agency or in your individual capacity pursuant to your personal interests.
We don't need to worry about your trying to avoid FOIAs or what the quality of your mattress is, quite frankly, sir. You should be ashamed of your character and embarrassed. I am glad that you are.
Today's hearing comes after a memo was released by the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. It suggests Fauci, along with Morens, may have used their personal email to conduct official business. Notably, on one occasion, the NIH FOIA office allegedly showed Morens how to make federal records disappear. Lawmakers allege that Morens could be guilty of lying to Congress, taking actions unbecoming of a federal employee, and avoiding disclosure of information under the Freedom of Information Act. Also today, Senator Rand Paul sent a letter to the Justice Department. He urged officials to investigate Morens, citing the evidence provided by the House subcommittee. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In Iowa, cleanup efforts are underway after deadly storms and tornadoes tore through the state yesterday. Multiple people were killed and at least a dozen were injured. This morning, Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds visited the small town of Greenfield, where an EF3 tornado hit yesterday. Authorities said some people were killed, but they are still counting the numbers. Search and rescue efforts are ongoing. One woman was confirmed dead when the vehicle she was driving was blown off the road. The tornado left a wide swath of destroyed homes, splintered trees, and crumpled cars. The twister also ripped apart massive wind turbines. The National Weather Service said it received 23 tornado reports yesterday. Most were in Iowa and one each in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Forecasters say they expect the storm system to turn south today. The National Weather Service has issued a tornado watch for the midsection of Texas, including Dallas. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on in sports, but let's first revisit the arrest of Scotty Scheffler last week. Now, this incident was witnessed by an ESPN reporter, but in the same car with him was play-by-play announcer Ben Wischusen. How does he retell it?
You know, he adds a little bit of color to what happened. This is an interview given in golf.com. Now, ESPN's Jeff Darlington, as you said, was in the same car with Bob Wischusen here when Scheffler's car pulled up beside him and this whole thing broke out. And it was Darlington's account, though, that most everyone has heard. I mean, he broke the story, but Wischusen here, I think, adds a little more. You know, he first describes the officer who would arrest Scheffler saying, quote, he was pretty, enthusiastic, let's say, end quote. Now, this is Officer Gillis, who Wischusen says got in front of Scheffler's car after Scheffler's car pulled up beside them, yelling something to the effect of, whoa, 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 who are you? Where are you going? Get back in line. You're not supposed to come through here. Essentially scolding Scheffler for passing on the left. And that's how this whole thing started, really. He also adds that it was dark. It was like 6 a.m., raining outside. The officers were wearing reflective jackets, so it wasn't really clear to them if they were police officers or tournament security staff. So anyway, after this interaction, Scheffler's car starts to pull away. Now, Darlington said at this point the officer attached himself to Scheffler's car. Now, according to the police incident report, Officer Gillis was dragged to the ground by the car, which led to pain, swelling, and abrasions to his wrist and knee. Now, Wischusen said when Scheffler started to pull away, the cop got very angry. But he says his impression was that the officer ran beside the vehicle and maybe he tripped and fell. Now, as far as the officer being, quote, attached to Scheffler's car, Wischusen said he didn't have a very clear view. In any case, Wischusen said when Scheffler stopped, Gillis was upset. He started to scream, get out of the car, shut the engine off, I'm a police officer. And he said the driver, quote, got out peacefully. And that's when they realized that it was the PGA's #1 ranked player, Scotty Scheffler. So that's when Darlington, put his reporter hat, jumped out of the car and broke the story. But definitely the biggest golf story of the year thus far.
Quite the story indeed. Looking at the WNBA, Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever are in action tonight, still looking for their first win of the season. How would you assess their performance through 4 games?
You know, I would say it looks like they're improving. Their first 4 games have been against the Connecticut Sun and the New York Liberty. These two had 2 of the 3 best records in the league last year, and they're combined 7-0 in this season. So a tough schedule to start with. Anyway, the Fever did significantly better the last 2 games, the rematches. Still lost both games. Tonight, though, they play the Seattle Storm. Seattle was 1-3 at last year. Indiana actually had a slightly better record than last year, though neither team made the playoffs. So I would say that this could be the night that Caitlin Clark and the Indiana Fever get their first win of the season.
Guess we'll keep our eyes peeled. While moving to the NHL playoffs tonight, we have Game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals between the Florida Panthers and New York Rangers. What do you see as the keys to this series?
You know, for the Rangers, it really begins with their goalie, Igor Shesterkin. You know, the Rangers were outshot by the Hurricanes in all 6 games last round, and they still won the series. And even when they swept Washington in the first round, the Capitals actually outshot them in 2 of the 4 games. Now, offensively, the Rangers, when it's 5-on-5, they're kind of an average team. It's their power play that's really elite. Now, conversely, Florida is a very balanced team. They're very deep. Their goalie, Sergei Bobrovsky, he's been more than solid this postseason, a 90% save percentage. This really looks like an evenly matched series. Now, New York has a home ice advantage. I think that could be the difference, and that's going to start tonight because they play Game 1 tonight at New York's Madison Square Garden.
Shifting gears now to the NBA playoffs, we have Game 1 between Minnesota and Dallas tonight. Now, it's been noted that the Timberwolves had a team that was built to especially beat Denver. How do they match up against Dallas?
You know, I've heard that argument a lot, mainly because they really start 2 centers in Karl Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert. Now, it did cause some problems from Nikola Jokic, but not in every game anyway. But it was certainly enough for them to win the series. But really, Minnesota had the best defense in the NBA, period, in the regular season against anyone. They allowed the fewest points per game, held their opponents to the lowest combined shooting percentage in the league. So I don't quite buy that they just assembled this team to only beat Denver specifically. I mean, if they did, it certainly worked out better than they were hoping, that's for sure. Dallas certainly is different than Denver. Luka Doncic puts up similar numbers to Jokic. He does it in a much different way. He penetrates and either scores or he kicks to a teammate who is open. I think Kyrie Irving could actually be the X factor in this series. He's a very good player. He's also been shown to be a very clutch player. If he's open, watch out. This could be Dallas going off on them.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.